So, you've heard about vibe coding, the internet's latest obsession with AI. What does it mean if developers can spin up an app in a couple of minutes? And what does it mean if you want to sell it to an investor? Today, we'll take a closer look at just that. So, let's kick it off. So wonderful. Here we go. Thank you so much for joining What's the Buzz, where leaders share how they have turned hype into outcome. Today we'll talk about vibe coding and its impact for developers and investors. And who better to talk about it than someone who's actively working on that? Matt van Itallie. Hey, Matt. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Wonderful. Hey, why don't you tell our audience a little bit about yourself, who you are, and what you do?
Sure. So I'm the founder and CEO of a software company called Sema. And what we do is bring executive insight into engineering, demystify engineering software development for non-technical audiences on the C-suite and the board of directors. I'm the son of a math teacher and a computer programmer, so I was kind of born to treat code as data, and have had the great pleasure through Sema to help analyze more than 1.5 trillion worth of code bases over the last 8 years.
Wow, that sounds impressive. So I'm super excited to have you on. And folks, for those of you in the audience, if you're just joining the stream, drop a comment in the chat where you're joining us from. I'm always curious to see how global our audience is. And also don't forget to pick up your copy of the AI Leadership Handbook so you can learn how you can turn technology hype into business outcomes. Now, Matt, with that out of the way, what do you say? Should we play a little game to kick things off?
Absolutely, let's do it.
Okay, so hang on, I need to get my setup right real quick, and then here we go. I think here we go. Well, as you see nothing, right? That's not good. So I'll keep improvising here, but that's fine. Yeah. We usually have a little icebreaker that is called What's the Buzz? That's the whole idea of the show, and why I have this nice little prop here. But I'm curious, what do you think? If AI were a band, who or what would it be?
If AI were a band, who or what would it be? I mean, it's probably a cop-out to say electronica. Who are the folks who do Whip It? Is it Devo? Oh, Whip It Good. 80s, kind of.
Oh yeah. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
kind of a normal, but also kind of kooky. That is how I think about AI. It is human-like, but also kooky in some surprising ways.
I love that. That's a great answer. I'm always surprised with what my guests come up with when I ask these questions and what the analogies are. But that's definitely a great one. And I mean, there are so many great bands. I was just playing 𝘃𝗏𝗏 to my children the other day because they wanted something different. I said, hey, electronic music. So good times. Speaking of good times, it seems that the internet lately has gone pretty crazy in the last couple of weeks about a new trend, right? And lots of people are having good time with that too, vibe coding. And with a few prompts and the right tool, anyone can quickly build an app, and pretty much any app too, right? All you need is an idea and an AI tool that can generate the code for you. And now I know you've been in this space for code analysis and these things for a number of years, like you said. I'm just curious, what are you making of this trend as somebody who professionally looks at these type of things and helps companies understand how good is their code and is it usable and is it modern and all these kind of things?
Exactly. Well, I always like to start with the personal take. I myself have been trying out vibe coding and have used it to build simple prototypes of applications over the last few months. And I absolutely understand what the buzz is about, if I can. I am pretty technical, but definitely not a professional software developer. And I am able, using these vibe coding techniques, to take an idea, heavily refine it first, and then produce a working code that is live, just through my own efforts. It is, it's personally incredibly exciting to be able to build that way, to have outputs that are accessible to me that weren't accessible before, and it's also really helpful to our business to be able to really the next level of prototyping, by showing real products in the wild, so to speak. It makes 𝘊𝗵𝗲, what we're building next, much more so than ideas, words on a page, or images, even just a clickable prototype. But a real, a real live app really goes a long way.
I love that answer. And I have a couple of follow-ups for you in a second, specifically around prototyping. And I've been experimenting with vibe coding as well, and spent a couple long nights, short nights, depending on how you look at it, going down the rabbit hole of getting excited about something that I built in a couple of minutes, and then spending hours trying to, get it to where I really want it to be. And I'm just amazed and excited by the opportunity too. And me too. I've learned about software development in college. I did some scripting when I was in an IT organization. Also, I've never really been a professional software developer like you shared as well. But I know enough how you write code, what the different elements and functions and variables and constants and things are and what they do. So being able to have that booster and do that much more quickly, I can only share the excitement, right? It's amazing these days. But I'm curious. You work with a lot of startups and founders, probably among many other different kinds of companies. And who are you seeing? Who is vibe coding actually for, and to what degree does it democratize that access to software development?
Yeah. So I use the very narrow term of vibe coding to mean only using human language based techniques in order to produce code, and only edit it through the human language interface, which is a particular subset, a very important and obviously very sexy subset of the overall approach of Gen AI enabled enabled software development, which involves not only perhaps starting with human language interface, but then using professional software development techniques to modify. In the strictest definition, there are many. There's absolutely right, a democratization of many folks who are non-coders who are actually trying to build full and complete applications just through vibe coding. I believe the latest from 𝘊𝗵𝗵𝗁 is it may be a 10% of their products, if I understand it right, of their recent class, are almost 95% Gen AI generated only code, and they're able to generate some meaningful revenue from it. We also know that inside product management functions within organizations, that vibe coding has skyrocketed, which makes sense. Traditionally, product managers would build very detailed requirements and then turn them over to an engineering team for prototyping. Well, now for prototypes, and we're going to talk about the risks and why, the limitations of vibe coding, but certainly for a prototype that just needs to get the idea across, product managers are able to do that themselves and skip a step. And what I would say, thinking about how busy our developers are, remove some of the lower priority work. I mean, basically, software engineering is so valuable, and what they do is so valuable. Anything we can do to take non-essential work away from them and let them focus on the hard stuff, the meaningful stuff, is good for them. It's good for the organization. It's good for ultimately users. So I know from our experience and more broadly, product management is probably the place where vibe coding has taken off the most significantly at the enterprise level.
That's exciting, and still also a little bit concerning, I could imagine, for software developers who say, well, if anybody can do what I have learned and trained, or maybe even they think they can do it, but they actually can't because I have spent years honing my craft. Where do you see this going? I mean, there's certainly leaders out there, leaders of AI labs, who say, by a certain point in time in the not too distant future, we will only be using AI to code, and software development is losing in relevance. What do you make of that?
Yeah, I certainly think we're certainly a broad trend towards AI being able to perform more and more activities that were previously the domain of software developers. I studied history in undergrad, and I take a longer term historical view here, which is, let's say 70 years ago, to be a computer programmer meant to manage punch cards and keep track of them and make sure they were sorted and then feed them into the computer. And you were a computer programmer, and you literally were working on these cards. And since came, in no particular order, version control systems and IDEs, like workspaces where folks can get work done, and open source code where you're pulling, what you want to build, but you don't have to build it yourself. And so in that sense, the history of software development is one of greater and greater abstraction, where the idea, and then you have more and more adept tools to be able to carry this out. Even before the rise of AI for coding, if you take the ratio of software developers working on the Apollo mission, so the space control, NASA space control systems in the 70s, and you compare that to the number of software engineers working at SpaceX, something like 1,000 times more productive over the history, over that time period of what individual coders are able to do. Now, AI is a continuation of that. Obviously, we all believe that it's a greater acceleration of what is possible. But I think the nuance, the understanding of how to manage edge cases, of how to manage a complex system, of how to handle existing code. Right? It's different perhaps if you're starting with new code and how far you can get, but to take existing systems that are powering everything we do, since software has been eating the world for some time, developers will remain extremely critical in managing enterprise systems. They'll be empowered by AI, but they'll remain absolutely critical.
Something that I've experienced firsthand. I feel it aligns pretty well to some of the research in other areas when it comes to Gen AI use, where some of those sentiments where AI helps those that have a certain level of proficiency be even more productive, but it also helps those who are more at an entry level get to a similar level as those that are proficient. For me, when I vibe coded my business simulation app, I felt like it was propelling me and accelerating parts of what I know, because I know where some of the gaps are, where some of the issues are, or when I ran into issues that I could troubleshoot it, or that I sort of had an idea what to look for and see how I can tweak it. So I think you absolutely have a point there, right? That if you're a professional software developer, this helps you on one hand accelerate what you do, but on the other hand, you need to have that knowledge so you can also either counteract or figure out why it's not working exactly as you want it to, and guide it, right? Guide it too. It's almost like a like pottery. So.
Exactly.
Not sure how many software developers will like that statement, but we'll figure that out in the comments. Now, you mentioned prototyping, right? It helps you if you're in product management, or maybe if you want to create a sales demo, or just show the art of the possible to some extent. But I'm concerned that people might take this a step further and say, well, it's not just the art of the possible, it is the possible, and we deploy it and we maybe monetize it, we put it out in the open, we have a new app. but maybe have not applied the same rigor that professional software developers today would apply. What unexpected challenges do you see that novice coders might run into?
Yeah, so there are four primary risks for using Gen AI to code, whether it's vibe coding and it's purely using natural language, or using Gen AI as a start and then also coding directly. The risks are greater with pure vibe coding for sure than Gen AI enabled or enhanced coding. The first is security risk. Gen AI code leaves behind or introduces security vulnerabilities that lets bad actors act or information leak out. By the way, so does all kinds of code. So does human written code. So does open source code. The point is not that one way necessarily is more riskier than others, but that they all need a human in the loop. They need a review in order to manage that risk. A second is code quality and maintainability and accuracy. Again, a prototype might have a simple number of use cases, but to get the edge cases right, and if you're going to use it in an enterprise setting, for sure, it needs to be exactly right. Getting it close really doesn't cut it. Really doesn't cut it. And coming along with that, there's such an increase in volume of code because it's so easy to just have the system spit out so much code that it becomes harder to understand and therefore harder to maintain. Then there's two other issues that are at least in specialized situations. The third is Gen AI code will, under certain circumstances, likely not get copyright protection, a form of intellectual property protection. And so for enterprise organizations who copyright their code, this isn't about copyright infringement, but copyright protection, it seems increasingly clear that they're going to have to change their approach to IP management or emphasize the importance of software developer involvement in the code itself. If you're listening to this and you work at an enterprise that copyrights code, please go talk to your lawyers to make sure that they're helping you on a go-forward plan. And the fourth and final reason is something we call exit risk. And what exit risk is the possibility that if you're trying to sell your business, that organizations who are conducting technical due diligence, which is to say looking under the hood at the code itself, might conclude, well, if your code was entirely vibe coded or Gen AI generated, what are we buying, right? We can just produce this ourselves. Audience, think about, the analogy breaks down a little bit, but think about a professor assigning a term paper, and the student comes back and the professor says, how much did you do? And the student said, I just fed it into an LLM and spit out the answer. That's of course unethical, although I guess good on you for telling the truth, this student, but it certainly does not in any way suggest there is intellectual knowledge in the underlying document. And that's the very real risk in diligence situations. And by the way, it's already begun to happen where folks are walking away, organizations are walking away from deals where the code is almost entirely Gen AI generated.
And what are some of the reasons why they are walking away? Is it because there's no actual IP in the business?
There's no IP. If you can prompt your way to code, nothing's stopping you from stopping the buyer from building it themselves.
Yeah. Now, even before vibe coding was a thing, I think in investors, PE firms, I don't know, you've worked with some of the largest PE firms on the planet. They've started to get interested in this composition. How much is actually human coded? How much is AI coded? What are some of the other reasons? You mentioned IP as one part, but why should you be careful there on one hand, yes, vibe coding, but have the human in the loop?
Yeah, exactly. So the humans in the loop, speaking of another reason why developers remain so essential, is the best way to address all four of those risks. On the security risk side, there is, in our view, a presumption that if the Gen AI code has not been modified, well, that means it has not gone through a security review. It's not feasible code that comes straight out of the LLM to be security risk free. So there's a default presumption that that sellers would have to justify, and so having humans in the loop and obviously involved in modifying or blending that code instead of it pure is what we would say is at least a signal that they're addressing security warnings. Quality and maintainability, same thing. If it just came out of an LLM, there's a presumption that it's definite that it hasn't been deeply understood, and the edge case is added. So the human blending really makes a difference. On exit risk, huge difference between on exit risk, huge difference between code that started with Gen AI and was modified, and which is to say pure Gen AI, Gen AI becoming blended Gen AI, and just Gen AI code itself that stayed pure from the beginning, makes a really big difference in terms of the likelihood of the intellectual property. And then finally, on the intellectual property risk side, the copyright side, this is not legal advice. You should most certainly talk to your lawyers if your organization seeks copyright protection. But the U.S. Copyright Office announced, earlier this year that prompting is not enough to get that protection. You need to have humans actually creating the work. It's a fundamental component. Human involvement is a fundamental component of that IP protection.
Thank you for sharing that, and I really appreciate how you're speaking with depth and experience on what you're seeing in the market. Right? It sounds so easy on one hand. Soon enough we won't be coding. AI will do all the work in so many different sectors and professions. Software development is as well. But then when you look under the hood, and like you just did, and you said, well, IP, security, exit risk, and so on. Those are real risks, especially if you want to sell your business at some point, or you want to sell your app to an investor. So we've already covered a lot of ground, from Vibecoding as this cool new trend. You don't have to be a programmer. You can just instruct the LLM or the tool to create an app for you using natural language. You can refine it. You either should know what you're doing, is what I'm hearing, or you should know somebody who can help you figure out what you're doing and that you're doing it right, so that you're protected further down the line. Right? What are some of the other things that you're hearing in the industry when it comes to coding, Gen AI coding, especially as far as in investors, PE firms, private equities are concerned? What's top of mind for them?
Yeah, well, I'm happy to share with you and your audience the results of our benchmarking, which we believe is some of the first benchmarking there is on a Gen AI code usage, certainly among investor-backed companies. And what we found at enterprise-grade code by large part investor-backed companies, Gen AI is approximate for the median organization. I'll just get it right. Organizations are using Gen AI to start about 11% of their code, their production code. That's the 50th percentile. The 25th percentile is 6%, and the 75th percentile is 16%. So half the organizations are at between starting Gen AI at between 6 and 16%.
Mm-hmm.
The pure Gen AI code, where it started with Gen AI but has not been modified, is at most between 3 and 9% of the code. Okay. That to us is a really good sign, because that means everybody's getting the message that starting with Gen AI code is a good idea in at least some circumstances, which we most certainly agree with. But my goodness, pure Gen AI code is really risky and should be kept to the minimum in enterprise settings like this. So developers know it. They know, code is a craft. It is not just reducible to mechanical process, and they know that they have to be involved to make sure it's correct and building the right thing and building it with care. And also the organizations they are a part of, have gotten the message that Gen AI is a very, very powerful tool, and it's only going to grow in importance in the developer's tool chain. but my goodness, that needs to be done with care and precision in the production stack, and when the code actually gets in the code that actually gets used by enterprise users.
So the question that I wanted to ask earlier goes in the same direction. Is, when you hear, again, AI is going to make coding not just easier, but it's going to automate it. When you hear about the risks on one hand, right? It's not as simple. It's not as straightforward, especially not if you want to patent it or if you want to copyright the work that you're doing. So, take it with a grain of salt. And on the other hand, to your point, the data seems to show that it's already a great starting point to build upon, to refine it, to extend it. So good happy medium, as in many things in life, right?
Exactly. We say the Goldilocks zone. Literally, we explain to our clients, you too little Gen AI code and you are missing out on a great opportunity for productivity, for job satisfaction, for all the above. But too much, and certainly too much pure as opposed to blended code, and you're opening up the organization some real risk.
Wonderful. Now, Matt, we're getting close to the end of the show today, and I was wondering if you can summarize the key 3 takeaways for our audience today from our episode.
All right. Well, certainly number one is that if AI was a band, it would be Devo. Wait, that doesn't count.
Yeah.
I
Yes.
have to use it. So number one, everyone should be trying. Everyone should be trying vibe coding, and if that feels like too much, just try vibe writing. Have it produce an article for you in human language. Everything we're doing these days is everything we're doing electronically, at least, is going to be AI enabled, if not AI based. And the faster you can wrap your head around it, whether it's picking a movie or doing something at work, the easier you'll be able to understand its capabilities and its limits. That could be through vibe coding if you wanted to build something or see what it's like, give it a shot. But if not, pick something and put it to work. Everyone has to be an AI enabled. You'd just be massively missing out, again, whether it's vibe coding or not. Second, vibe coding in particular is a spectacular way to enable prototyping, and especially to help enable product management teams get to testing faster, in particular by protecting engineers' time. And third, Gen AI coding in general and vibe coding in particular is incredibly dangerous in enterprise settings, and it to mitigate, must have a human in the loop, must have developers blending that Gen AI code. Pure Gen AI code is extremely risky and in our view, should not be used in enterprise settings beyond a de minimis amount.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Matt. It's been a pleasure having you on and learning from you and hearing all these insights from you on how you can use Gen AI as a developer, and also what it means if you're an investor, if you're trying to sell your app to an investor, things that we should all be aware of in enterprise especially. Matt, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed it.
Wonderful. All right, folks, see you next time for another episode of What's the Buzz?